I never thought I'd be the type of person telling this story from my childhood bedroom. But here we are, 6 months ago. I had everything figured out. I had a plan. I had support. And I had a vision that was going to change everything. Now I'm staring at the same faded boy band posters I had in high school, wondering how someone I trusted could destroy everything I worked for. It started innocently enough. I'd been working retail for 2 years after college, watching my life slip away one customer service smile at a time. When I finally realized I was meant for something bigger, social media was exploding. Influencers were making 6 figures posting pictures of their breakfast, and I had everything it took to succeed. The look, the personality, the vision. The only thing I was missing was time to focus on building my brand. That's when I approached Marcus with my proposal. We'd been dating for a few weeks, and he seemed genuinely interested in supporting my dreams. I'll never forget that conversation in his living room. The way his eyes lit up when I explained how the influencer economy worked, how this wasn't just some vanity project, but a real business opportunity. Look, I know it sounds crazy, I told him, curled up on his expensive leather couch, but I've done the research. Micro-influencers in my demographic are pulling in serious money. I just need 6 months to focus completely on content creation, building my follower base, establishing partnerships. 6 months to prove this can work. Marcus listened intently, occasionally nodding as I broke down the numbers. The strategy, the potential return on investment. He was always good with business concepts, which is why I knew he'd understand this wasn't just some whimsical dream. And you'd need to quit your job to make this work, he asked. That's the thing about building a personal brand, I explained. It's not a side hustle. It requires complete dedication. The successful influencers treat it like a full-time job, because that's exactly what it is. I can't build an authentic following while I'm stuck folding sweaters 8 hours a day. He was quiet for a moment, and I could practically see him running calculations in his head. Finally, he smiled. Okay, let's see how serious you are about this. 6 months. I'll cover your expenses. Help however I can. But I want to see real progress. That's the Marcus I fell for. Supportive. Generous. Willing to invest in our future together. If only I'd known how quickly he turned vindictive the moment things didn't go exactly his way. Those first few months were incredible. I threw myself into content creation with an intensity that honestly impressed even me. Every day was carefully planned around optimal posting times, lighting conditions, engagement strategies. Marcus helped set up my website, handled the technical aspects I didn't have time to learn, and generally made himself useful with the business side of things. Okay, I'll admit I probably could have been more appreciative of his contributions. But that's the thing people don't understand about building a brand in this industry. Every detail matters. When I asked him to adjust the ring light for the 15th time during a product review shoot, I wasn't being difficult. I was being professional. The lighting was casting shadows that would have made the skincare products look cheap. And my followers trust me to give them quality content. Hold this reflector higher, I'd tell him during our afternoon shoots. No, higher. The angle is all wrong. We need to catch the natural light from the window. Sometimes he'd get this look, like I was asking too much. But this was my career we were building. When you're trying to establish credibility with brands worth millions of dollars, you don't get to be sloppy about production values. Dorian and Lyra understood this completely. They'd been in the influencer space longer than me and always emphasized that followers can tell when you're not putting in full effort. By month 3, my follower count was growing steadily, and I was starting to get interest from smaller brands for partnership opportunities. Nothing huge yet, but the foundation was definitely there. That's when I started planning what would become the turning point of my entire career. A 3-week European content creation tour. The idea came to me during a strategy session with Dorian and Lyra. We were analyzing what separated the mid-tier influencers from the ones who really made it big, and the pattern was obvious. The successful ones had aspirational content that transported their followers to places they could only dream of visiting. Luxury hotels in Paris, boutique shopping in Milan, sunset dinners overlooking the Mediterranean. That was the content that got millions of views and caught the attention of major brands. You need to think bigger. Dorian told me over coffee at that trendy place downtown, your aesthetic is great. Your engagement is solid, but you're still creating content that looks like everyone else's. You need something that sets you apart. She was right. I'd been playing it safe with local content. But if I wanted to compete with influencers who had year-long head starts, I needed to make a statement. A European tour would position me as a luxury lifestyle brand, attract followers who are interested in high-end products, and create enough content to last months. Marcus wasn't immediately sold on the idea when I presented it to him that evening. The budget was substantial. Flights, hotels, restaurants, activities, wardrobe updates for different climates and settings. But I walked him through the business case carefully. This wasn't a vacation. It was a marketing investment that would pay dividends for years. 3 weeks seems like a long time, he said, reviewing the itinerary I'd put together. That's barely enough time to hit all the major locations, I explained. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Amsterdam. Each city needs at least 4 days to create meaningful content. And that's not including travel time, weather delays, all the logistics that could go wrong. I could see him doing mental math, probably calculating hotel costs and restaurant budgets. And Dorian and Lyra are doing the same trip. We're coordinating our schedules, but we'll be creating separate content. It's actually more cost-effective to travel together. We can split transportation, maybe share accommodations in some cities. Plus, having other creators there means we can help each other with photos and videos. Eventually, he agreed, not enthusiastically, but he understood that building a brand required investment capital, just like any other business venture. What I didn't expect was how weird he got about the details as the trip approached. The morning of our departure, Marcus drove me to the airport like we'd planned. I was buzzing with excitement, mentally reviewing my content calendar and checking that I had all my equipment properly packed. This trip was going to change everything. I could feel it. Dorian and Lyra were already at the departure gate when we arrived, looking effortlessly stylish in their travel outfits. I'd coordinated my look to complement theirs. We wanted our arrival content to have a cohesive aesthetic that would work well for all our individual brands. That's when Marcus started acting strange. As we approached the gate area, he was walking close enough to me that we'd definitely be in photos together. And I realized I hadn't thought through how to handle this situation. The thing is, my brand was built around a specific image. Independent, aspirational, someone my followers could see themselves becoming. Having a boyfriend prominently featured in my travel content would completely undermine that narrative. Okay, you can stop here, I told him when we were still far enough from the gate that Dorian and Lyra wouldn't associate us. I can handle my luggage from here. But he kept walking, clearly not understanding the optics of the situation. When we got closer to where my friends were waiting, I had to be more direct. No, don't stand next to me, I said quietly. I don't need people to think I'm dating you. You'll ruin my image. I wasn't trying to be cruel. This was purely a business decision. My followers were invested in a particular version of my life. And suddenly introducing a boyfriend, especially one who didn't fit the aesthetic I'd been building, would have been jarring and off-brand. Marcus got this weird look on his face and said, "Yeah, you're right. Wouldn't want to ruin your red carpet moment." The sarcasm was unnecessary, but I didn't have time to deal with his feelings right then. I was about to embark on the most important 3 weeks of my career, and I needed to stay focused on what mattered. The trip itself was everything I'd hoped for, and more. The content I created in those 3 weeks was absolutely stunning. The kind of aspirational lifestyle imagery that separates amateur influencers from real brands. Dorian, Lyra and I worked perfectly as a team, helping each other capture the perfect shots and exploring locations that were pure content gold. In Paris, I got the most gorgeous photos at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Eiffel Tower. The golden hour lighting was perfect, and my outfit, this flowing dress I'd bought specifically for the trip, looked incredible against the city backdrop. Those photos alone got more engagement than anything I'd posted before. Rome was amazing for historical content. I did a whole series about ancient beauty rituals and how they connected to modern skincare, with the Colosseum and Roman Forum as backdrops. The engagement was incredible, and I started getting messages from followers about how inspiring and educational my content was becoming. Marcus barely contacted me during those 3 weeks, which was honestly a relief. I'd been worried he might be clingy or demanding attention when I needed to focus on work, but he seemed to understand that this was my time to concentrate on building something important. The only weird thing was that he didn't respond to most of my messages. I'd send him photos of amazing locations or updates about how well the content was performing, and he'd either respond hours later with something brief or not respond at all. I figured he was probably busy with his own work and didn't want to distract me from mine. When I got back from Europe, I was practically glowing with excitement. My phone was full of incredible content. My follower count had grown significantly while I was away, and I had enough material to last months. This was exactly the breakthrough I'd been working toward. But when I got to Marcus's house, My key didn't work. I stood there for a solid minute, thinking I must be using the wrong key or turning it the wrong direction. Travel exhaustion, maybe, but no matter what I tried, the lock wouldn't turn. I rang the doorbell, knocked, even tried calling Marcus, but there was no answer. Finally, Grant from next door came outside with this uncomfortable expression on his face. "Hey, Celeste," he said, not quite making eye contact. "Marcus isn't here. He left for a motorcycle trip a few days ago." "Okay, but my key isn't working," I told him, holding it up like evidence. Grant shifted awkwardly. "He changed the locks last week. And, he had a moving company come by. They took a bunch of stuff to storage." The words weren't making sense. Changed the locks? Moving company. I'd been gone for 3 weeks on a business trip, and he'd decided to redecorate. "What do you mean, storage?" I asked. "Look, maybe you should call him," Grant said, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. "I don't really know the details." I tried calling Marcus immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting, but the messages showed as delivered but not read. Meanwhile, I'm standing on the porch of what I thought was my home, with 3 weeks' worth of luggage. Completely locked out, I had to call my parents to come pick me up, which was humiliating beyond words. My dad barely spoke during the drive, but I could feel his disapproval radiating from the front seat. My mother kept asking questions I couldn't answer about why Marcus would change the locks, what kind of fight we'd had before I left, whether I'd done something to upset him. "We didn't fight," I kept telling her. "Everything was fine when I left. This is completely out of nowhere." But even as I said it, I was trying to figure out what could have triggered such an extreme reaction. The airport thing? That was weeks ago. And it was a completely reasonable business decision. He'd seemed to understand that at the time. Over the next few days, I tried everything to reach Marcus. Calls, texts, emails, even messaging him through social media. Nothing. It was like he'd completely disappeared, which was insane behavior for someone who was supposed to be supportive of my career. Finally, Dorian suggested I try a more direct approach. Maybe he's heard about something and just needs space to cool off. She said, sometimes guys need everything spelled out for them. So I sent him a long text explaining exactly why I'd made the decisions I'd made, how everything I'd done was focused on building a future for both of us, and how his reaction was completely disproportionate to whatever he thought I'd done wrong. That's when I got the email. It was the coldest, most passive-aggressive thing I'd ever received. Marcus laid out in excruciating detail how he'd spent the 3 weeks while I was away reorganizing his priorities. He'd sold the SUV he'd been letting me drive. He'd moved all my belongings to a storage unit across town, a storage unit I'd have to pay for myself if I wanted to keep my stuff. He'd changed not just the locks, but all the passwords for accounts I'd been using, including the website he'd helped me set up. The website. He'd completely wiped my website. 3 weeks of European content, months of previous posts, my entire portfolio gone. Just a blank page with a message saying the domain was no longer in service. I'm not exaggerating when I say this was the most vindictive, destructive thing anyone had ever done to me. He'd systematically dismantled my entire life because his feelings were hurt about one minor incident at the airport. When I tried calling him after receiving the email, his phone was disconnected. When I drove by his house, yes, I had to borrow my mother's car because he'd stolen mine. There was a for sale sign in the yard. That's when I realized how calculated this whole thing was. This wasn't some emotional breakdown or temporary tantrum. Marcus had spent 3 weeks methodically destroying everything we'd built together, and then he disappeared to avoid facing the consequences of what he'd done. I contacted a lawyer immediately. What Marcus had done was clearly illegal. Theft, destruction of property, breach of contract. We'd had an agreement about the financial support, and he couldn't just unilaterally decide to end it and take everything with him. But here's where the story gets even more infuriating. Apparently, because Marcus had been smart enough to keep everything in his name, the car, the house, even the website domain, there wasn't much legal recourse available. The lawyer explained that since we weren't married and hadn't formalized our business arrangement with contracts, most of what he'd done was technically within his rights. "What about my belongings?" I asked. "He can't just steal my personal property." "He didn't steal them," the lawyer explained. "He moved them to storage and provided you with the location and access information. He's even paid the first month's fees." It was unbelievable. Marcus had found a way to destroy my life while staying just barely within legal boundaries. And meanwhile, according to Calder, one of his friends who I managed to reach, Marcus was having the time of his life on some cross-country motorcycle adventure, posting pictures of himself looking completely carefree and happy. The worst part was how quickly everyone else abandoned me once the situation became complicated. Dorian and Lyra, who I'd just spent 3 amazing weeks with in Europe, suddenly became too busy to help me figure out how to rebuild my brand. They stopped responding to my messages, didn't engage with any of my social media posts, and basically acted like our friendship had never existed. They're probably just trying to avoid drama. My mother suggested, but I knew what was really happening. They were protecting their own brands by distancing themselves from someone whose life had imploded. So much for loyalty and supporting each other in the influencer community. My parents, meanwhile, kept making passive-aggressive comments about how I should have seen this coming, how I'd been too dependent on Marcus, how I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Easy for them to say. They'd never tried to build a business from scratch. Never understood what it takes to succeed in a competitive creative industry. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, my father said one evening over dinner. Now you can focus on finding a real job, building some stability, a real job. As if everything I'd been working toward for the past 6 months was just playing pretend. As if the thousands of followers I'd gained, the brand partnerships I'd been developing, the content that had inspired people, none of that counted as real work. But here's the thing that really gets me. Marcus's timing was absolutely deliberate. He waited until I was out of the country, completely unable to defend myself or salvage anything, before he struck. Then he disappeared on his little motorcycle adventure precisely when I returned, so I couldn't even confront him about what he'd done. According to Calder, who seemed to enjoy updating me on Marcus's activities, he was living his best life and seemed happier than he'd been in months. Meanwhile, I was stuck in my childhood bedroom, trying to piece together what was left of my career and my life. The storage unit was the final insult. When I finally made it over there to assess what he'd left me with, it was clear he'd just thrown everything together without any care or organization. Clothes wrinkled and damaged, electronics mixed in with kitchen items, my carefully curated wardrobe treated like garage sale leftovers, and the monthly fee for the unit was almost as much as I used to spend on groceries. Marcus knew I didn't have income coming in anymore, knew I'd have to choose between paying for storage and paying for basic necessities. It was psychological warfare disguised as practical logistics. I've been trying to rebuild ever since, but it's almost impossible to start over when someone has systematically destroyed your foundation. My social media accounts still exist, but without the website as a central hub, without the European content that was supposed to launch me to the next level, without any of the momentum I'd been building, I'm basically starting from zero. Worse than zero, actually, because now I have to explain to potential brand partners why my online presence is so inconsistent, why there's a gap in my content, why my website disappeared, and I can't exactly tell them the truth, that my vindictive ex-boyfriend destroyed everything because I hurt his feelings one time. I've been trying to sell some of my belongings to generate enough cash to pay for the storage unit and maybe restart my website, but even that's been a struggle. Turns out designer clothes and ring lights don't hold their value the way you'd expect. The hardest part is that nobody seems to understand what Marcus actually did to me. When I try to explain the situation to people, they act like this was just a normal breakup, like we both made mistakes and now we're moving on. They don't see how calculated and cruel his retaliation was, how he deliberately waited until I was most vulnerable to strike. Maybe he was hurt by something you did. People keep suggesting as if that justifies destroying someone's career and livelihood. Have you considered reaching out to apologize? Apologize for what? For taking my business seriously, for making smart branding decisions, for treating our relationship like the mutually beneficial partnership it was supposed to be. I've thought about this situation from every possible angle, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. Marcus never actually supported my dreams the way he claimed to. He was fine playing along when it made him feel important and needed, but the moment I demonstrated real independence and business acumen, he couldn't handle it. The airport incident was just an excuse. If it hadn't been that, he would have found some other reason to sabotage everything I was building. Some men just can't handle being with a woman who has bigger ambitions than they do. What really bothers me is how everyone seems to think his reaction was somehow proportionate or understandable. I made one comment about protecting my brand image, something any serious business person would understand, and he responded by destroying months of work and investment. How is that a reasonable response? And the way he disappeared afterward, refusing to have an adult conversation about what happened, just proves that he knew his behavior was indefensible. If he'd really been justified in his actions, he would have stuck around to explain himself instead of running away like a coward. Now, I'm supposed to just accept that my career has been derailed, that months of hard work have been wasted, that I'm back to square one because someone couldn't handle dating a woman with professional ambitions. Everyone keeps telling me to move on and learn from this experience. But what exactly am I supposed to learn? That I should never trust anyone to support my dreams. That I should keep my ambitions small enough to make insecure men comfortable. The influencer industry moves fast, and the window I had to establish myself is closing. While I've been dealing with this mess, other creators have been building their followings, securing brand partnerships, creating the kind of content I should have been making. By the time I manage to rebuild, if I ever do, the landscape will have completely changed. Sometimes I lie awake in this ridiculous childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what my life would look like right now if Marcus had been the supportive partner he claimed to be. I'd probably have a 6-figure following by now, brand partnerships with major companies, maybe my own product line. The European content would have opened doors I can't even imagine. Instead, I'm trying to figure out how to pay for a storage unit and wondering if I should take my father's advice about finding a real job, as if spending the next 40 years in some corporate cubicle is somehow more dignified than building a personal brand and inspiring people through social media. The worst part is that Marcus gets to move on with his life like nothing happened. He sold his house, disappeared on his motorcycle adventure, and probably tells people we just grew apart or some other sanitized version of events. Meanwhile, I'm left dealing with the consequences of his vindictive behavior every single day. People don't understand how much damage someone can do when they decide to turn against you. Marcus had access to everything: my accounts, my website, my business plans, my financial situation. He knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage, and he did it with surgical precision. And now, months later, I'm supposed to just accept that this is how things turned out, that someone I trusted completely decided to destroy everything I'd worked for. And there's no recourse, no justice, no way to undo the damage he caused. But I'm not giving up. Eventually, I'll find a way to rebuild what he destroyed. I'll create content that's even better than what I was doing before. I'll prove that his sabotage was just a temporary setback, not a permanent defeat. Because that's the thing Marcus never understood about me, and I don't quit. I don't let other people's insecurities and limitations define what I can achieve. He may have won this battle, but the war is far from over.